It was Hale. But this time, he was different. His form was more solid, more real, and his eyes were filled with a strange, sad wisdom. He raised his hand, and the figures around me began to dissolve, their forms melting away into the shadows. I staggered to my feet, my heart pounding, and looked at Hale. He was standing still, his gaze fixed on me, and I knew that he was the key to escaping this nightmare. I approached him cautiously, unsure of what to expect. But as I drew closer, I saw something that filled me with dread, a chain, stretching from Hale's wrist to the lighthouse, binding him to the twisted structure. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep sadness, and I realized that he was trapped, a prisoner of this place, just as I was. He had been trying to protect me, to keep the darkness at bay, but he was powerless to escape its grasp. I reached out to him, my hand trembling, but as I did, the chain tightened, pulling him back toward the lighthouse. He struggled against it, but it was too strong, dragging him toward the twisted structure with relentless force. Desperation surged through me. I couldn't let him be taken, not after everything he had done to help me. I had to find a way to break the chain, to free him from the darkness that held him captive. But before I could act, the ground beneath us began to tremble. The sky darkened, the clouds swirling faster, and the whispering returned, louder than ever. The lighthouse groaned, its twisted form creaking as if it were alive, reacting to the growing tension. Hale looked at me, his eyes pleading, and I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the chain, my hands burning as I pulled against it with all my strength. The metal was cold, almost unbearably so, and it felt as though it was leaching the very warmth from my body. But I refused to let go. I couldn't. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, and the ground shook violently, but I held on, pulling with every ounce of strength I had left. The chain resisted, the metal digging into my palms, but I kept pulling, refusing to give in. Finally, with a deafening crack, the chain snapped. Hale stumbled forward, free from the lighthouse's grasp, but the victory was short-lived. The lighthouse groaned, the walls cracking and crumbling as the structure began to collapse. The ground beneath us gave way, the sand and rocks shifting as the entire landscape began to disintegrate. Hale grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the collapsing lighthouse, and we ran. The ground trembled beneath our feet, the sky above us swirling with dark clouds, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. The landscape was falling apart around us, the very fabric of this nightmarish world unraveling. The twisted rocks crumbled, the shadows melted away, and the air grew colder, sharper, as if we were being pulled through some invisible barrier. And then, with a blinding flash of light, everything went still. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the cold, hard floor of the lighthouse in Blackwater Bay. The familiar walls surrounded me, the air thick with the scent of salt and decay. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling through the cracks in the stone, but the oppressive darkness that had plagued the lighthouse was gone. I sat up, my body aching from the ordeal, and looked around. The chamber was empty, the equipment scattered around me, but there was no sign of Hale, or of the twisted lighthouse from the other realm. It took me a moment to realize that I was alone, truly alone. The whispering had stopped, the shadows no longer writhed with malevolent intent, and the air was clear, free of the suffocating presence that had haunted me since I first set foot in this cursed place. But something was different. I could feel it in my bones, a deep, unsettling sensation that something had changed, that the world I had returned to was not the same as the one I had left. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked to the entrance of the lighthouse. The door creaked open, and I stepped out into the storm, the wind lashing at my face, the rain soaking through my clothes. But I didn't care. I needed to see for myself, to confirm the gnawing suspicion that had taken hold of me. As I made my way down the rocky path to the shoreline, the storm seemed to intensify, the waves crashing against the cliffs with renewed fury. The sea was a churning mass of black water, the horizon lost in the darkness. But it wasn't the storm that held my attention, it was the town below. Blackwater Bay was gone. In its place was a wasteland, a desolate landscape of twisted metal and crumbling buildings. The town had been swallowed by the sea, the remnants of its existence scattered across the rocky shore. The streets were empty, the houses shattered, as if they had been abandoned for decades. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. This was not the Blackwater Bay I had known. This was something else, something twisted, as if the town had been torn from its place in the world and thrown into a nightmarish version of itself. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I hadn't just returned from the other realm, I had brought something back with me. The darkness that had consumed the lighthouse, the malevolent force that had trapped Hale, had followed me into this world, warping reality itself. I turned, my eyes scanning the shoreline for any sign of life, but there was none. The town was dead, a ghostly remnant of what it had once been. The people, the buildings, the very fabric of reality had been twisted and distorted beyond recognition. I was alone. But then, as I stood there, the wind howling around me, I saw something, a figure, standing at the edge of the wasteland, watching me. It was Hale, his form solid and real, but his eyes were filled with the same sad wisdom I had seen in the other realm. He raised his hand, a gesture of warning, and then he turned, disappearing into the shadows of the ruined town. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but something in me knew that I had to follow him, that the answers I sought lay within the twisted ruins of Blackwater Bay. I began to walk, the storm raging around me, the wind pushing me back with every step. The town loomed ahead, a dark, forbidding place that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The buildings were twisted, their forms distorted, and the streets were filled with shadows that writhed and shifted like living things. As I entered the town, the air grew colder, the light dimmer. The shadows closed in around me, whispering in a language I couldn't understand, but I pushed forward, determined to find Hale, to understand what had happened to this place, and to me. The streets twisted and turned, a labyrinth of ruined buildings and dark alleys. The ground beneath my feet was slick with rain, the cobblestones cracked and broken. The shadows seemed to watch me, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light, but I refused to let them stop me. Finally, after what felt like hours of wandering, I found Hale. He was standing in front of what had once been the town square, now a shattered ruin of broken statues and crumbling walls. The storm raged above us, the sky a swirling mass of dark clouds, but Hale was calm, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. I approached him cautiously, unsure of what to say. But before I could speak, he turned to me, his eyes filled with that same sad wisdom, and I knew that he had the answers I sought. He began to speak, his voice barely audible over the howling wind, and as he did, the truth of what had happened began to unfold. Blackwater Bay had been consumed by the darkness that had taken hold of the lighthouse, twisted and distorted by the malevolent force that had followed me from the other realm. The town, the people, the very fabric of reality had been warped beyond recognition, trapped in a nightmarish version of itself. And I was the cause. The realization hit me like a blow to the gut. I had brought this darkness with me, unleashed it upon this world, and now it had taken everything, consumed it in its insatiable hunger. But there was still hope. Hale explained that the darkness could be banished, that the town could be restored, but it would require a great sacrifice, one that only I could make. The lighthouse, the source of the darkness, had to be destroyed, its power shattered beyond repair. But to do so would require me to enter the other realm once more, to face the malevolent force that had trapped Hale and now sought to consume everything. I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a physical force. But I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let this darkness continue to consume everything, to twist and warp the world until nothing remained. I nodded, my resolve hardening. I would face the darkness, I would destroy the lighthouse, and I would restore Blackwater Bay, even if it cost me everything. Hale nodded in return, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. He knew what was at stake, what the cost would be, but he also knew that there was no other choice. With a final, solemn look, Hale turned and began to lead me back to the lighthouse, the storm raging around us as we made our way through the twisted ruins of Blackwater Bay. The shadows followed us, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light, but I refused to let them stop me. I would face the darkness. I would destroy the lighthouse. And I would save Blackwater Bay, no matter the cost. As we approached the lighthouse, its twisted form looming above us, I felt the weight of what was to come pressing down on me. The air was thick with tension, the storm above us reaching a fever pitch, but I pushed forward, determined to see this through to the end. The entrance to the lighthouse was open, the door hanging off its hinges, and as we stepped inside, the familiar darkness closed in around us. The whispering returned, louder now, more frantic, but I ignored it, my focus solely on the task at hand. We made our way through the dark corridors, the air growing colder with each step. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the shadows writhing and shifting like living things. But I refused to let them stop me. I was going to end this, once and for all. Finally, we reached the chamber where it had all begun, the place where I had first encountered the malevolent force that had consumed Blackwater Bay. The room was filled with a sickly green light, the walls etched with the same strange symbols that had covered the chamber in the other realm. And there, at the center of the room, was the source of the darkness, a twisted, pulsating mass of shadow and light, its form constantly shifting and changing. It was the heart of the lighthouse, the source of the malevolent force that had consumed everything. Hale turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve, and I knew what I had to do. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, and reached out to the twisted mass of darkness. The air around it was cold, almost unbearably so, and I could feel the darkness pulling at me, trying to consume me, to drag me down into its depths. But I refused to let it take me. With a final, desperate effort, I reached out and grabbed the heart of the lighthouse, my hands burning with cold as I pulled it free from the twisted mass of shadow. The darkness screamed, a deafening, inhuman wail that shook the very walls of the lighthouse. The shadows writhed and twisted, their forms dissolving as the malevolent force was ripped from its source. The ground beneath us began to tremble, the walls cracking and crumbling as the lighthouse began to collapse. The storm outside reached a fever pitch, the wind howling through the cracks in the stone, but I held on, refusing to let go of the heart of the darkness. Finally, with a deafening roar, the lighthouse collapsed, the twisted structure crumbling into the sea below. The darkness was gone, vanished, and as the storm began to subside, I knew that Blackwater Bay would be restored. But I also knew that I would not leave this place. The darkness had consumed too much, taken too much from me, and as the lighthouse crumbled around me, I knew that I was bound to this place, just as Hale had been. But I had done what I had set out to do. I had saved Blackwater Bay, banished the darkness, and restored the town to its former self. As the last of the lighthouse crumbled into the sea, I felt a sense of peace, of finality. I had done what I could, and now I could rest. The darkness was gone. Blackwater Bay was safe. And I was free. When the storm finally subsided, the lighthouse was nothing more than a pile of rubble, its twisted form shattered and scattered across the rocky shore. The sea had claimed it, pulling it down into the depths where it could do no more harm. Blackwater Bay had been restored, the town returned to its former self, free from the malevolent force that had twisted it beyond recognition. The streets were once again filled with life, the buildings standing tall and proud, the shadows banished to the corners where they belonged. But I was not there to see it. I remained on the shore, my body bound to the lighthouse's remains, the darkness that had consumed it still lingering within me. I could feel it, a deep, gnawing presence that refused to let go, that refused to allow me to leave. I had banished the darkness, but I had not escaped it. I was its prisoner, just as Hale had been, bound to the twisted remains of the lighthouse, unable to leave, unable to find peace. But I had done what I had set out to do. I had saved Blackwater Bay, restored the town, and banished the darkness. That was enough. As I stood on the shore, the waves crashing against the rocks, I felt a sense of peace, of finality. The darkness was still there, still lurking in the shadows, but it no longer had power over me. I had faced it, defeated it, and now I could rest. The light was fading, the sun setting on the horizon, casting long shadows across the shore. The storm had passed, the air was clear, and I could see the town of Blackwater Bay in the distance, the lights shining like beacons in the darkness. It was beautiful, a sight that filled me with a sense of satisfaction, of accomplishment. I had saved it, restored it, and now it would continue, free from the darkness that had threatened to consume it. As the last rays of light disappeared below the horizon, I felt the darkness closing in around me, but I was not afraid. I had done what I had set out to do, and now I could rest. The light faded, the darkness consuming the shore, and I knew that I would never leave this place, that I would remain bound to the lighthouse's remains, a guardian against the darkness that still lingered in the shadows. But that was enough. I had saved Blackwater Bay, and that was all that mattered. As the darkness closed in around me, I felt a sense of peace, of finality. The light was gone, but the darkness no longer had power over me. I was free. Morgan Blake. End of entry.